Hey everyone, what's going on? Professor Leis here. I want to take a moment to explain the practice session 1, part 1, structure after the fact. So I'm looking at the practice session in my digital version of Habits of the Creative Mind, edition 2. So this begins on page 200. It's in the section on structure. So in the book, there's the image of Rebecca Skloot's flashcards that she used to map out her entire book. So, in essence, what we're doing is that same activity. We're applying it to our essays, though. So let's go ahead and read through this, and I'll explain as we go through. In school, the operating assumption is often that there is one structure with which students should work: introduction, body, conclusion. Note that this approach begins by prescribing and organizing structure, no matter what the subject or project is, whereas the examples from McPhee and Skloot referenced in our essay above show structure emerging after the research process is finished or well underway. We've highlighted these examples because we think that the best time for you to make decisions about structure is after you've formulated the question you want to answer, the problem or puzzle you want to solve, or the idea you want to explore, and after you've taken time to do substantial research. Once you've gathered your materials, then you can experiment with how to organize it for your readers. So I just want to pause for a second and explain a couple of things. So if we look at this image up above of Rebecca Skloot's flashcards that she used for mapping out her book, it's really imperceptible, but the shading of these different flashcards they're different colors. I know it's a black and white photo, but you can kind of tell that some of them are darker, some of them are lighter. What Rebecca Skloot did is she used different colors to represent different storylines in her book. And so when they talk about that lowercase e structure, so that's something they mention, what she's doing is she's weaving these three different narratives together in such a way where it shows one portion of one story, and then it cuts to another portion of the second story, and then it goes to the another portion of the third story, and then it goes back to the first story and then gives a little bit more, and then to the second story and gives a little bit more, and then to the third story and gives a little bit more. And so they're using movie or cinema as an example for this. A lot of movies do that type of structure where they'll flash back between these different storylines throughout the entire movie, and that keeps the momentum of the story going, right? Now, of course, we're writing a smaller paper. It's not a book length project. Of course, it's only a few pages in length, but we can still think about that structure a little bit. Now, we've already completed draft 1. So in this situation, we're not necessarily doing any research for this essay project, but you are in a sense because you're looking at your own life and experiences. And so, in a way, you're kind of researching in your own mind. It's forcing you to look back at your life and think about the different experiences and your personal history and how they contribute to this value that you've come to um, venerate or hold in great esteem, right? And so now we're beginning to think about the structure a little bit more because we've begun that project. So that's what we mean by after, right? If we just sat down and tried to map it all out ahead of time before we even started writing, we would have a hell of a time coming up with ideas because we hadn't sat down to begin writing, right? But now that we've done that, now we have some ideas to work with and we can develop those ideas and think about a more concrete structure. And so that's what we're thinking about here. So let's get back into reading this. For this practice session, we are assuming you are well into a longer writing project. We highly recommend both the Be Interesting assignment discussed in On the Examined Life, Chapter 8, and the question you want to have thought about before graduating from college assignment discussed in On Choosing Your Own Adventure, Chapter 5, as launching points for longer projects. Those are their suggestions. We're, of course, working with our own essay project, but feel free to check those out if you'd like. Get a set of index cards and make a card for every section of your project. those you've already written, and those you are planning to write in order to finish the project. Set the cards out on a flat surface and then organize them so that they represent the structure you think best suits your project. When you've mapped out a structure you think works, step back and think carefully about what you see. So let's stop and let me comment on this a little bit. So you can use index cards, flashcards, or if you have post-it notes, or you could just cut up pieces of paper. You don't need to necessarily have flashcards or post-it notes. Rip out a couple of sheets of notebook paper, cut them out into cards. Now what you're going to do when they say for each section of your project, I'm going to recommend that you think about paragraphs. And so paragraphs are designed to organize the different sections of a given writing project, right? So use your paragraphs as those sections. And then because this is still a draft, we haven't finished the project yet, there's still some things that we haven't written, right? Or things that need to be further developed. And so you're going to also include those sections, things that you actually haven't written in your draft yet. And you're going to say, okay, so the next point I need to talk about is this. And then the point I want to talk about after that is this other point. And you'll kind of map out your future portions of the project as well. So both what you already have written and what you're planning on writing, because we still are in the early stages, right? If you see a path that moves the reader through the development of your project, ask the following questions to think in finer detail about its organization. So these questions here are designed to help you think more about that path, how you've organized the ideas and how you plan to continue organizing them. So let's go ahead and read through these questions. What shape is the path? Is it straight and simple because you're writing a descriptive essay? There's this and that and the other thing, so it's kind of a linear fashion, right? Given the assignment or your ambitions, is this structure sufficient? So let me pause for a second. I've encouraged everyone to think about the structure and think about beginning your essay with some sort of example or anecdote from your experience that could lead into your discussion of the value, right? And then analyzing how your experiences contribute to that value. So play around with the structure a little bit. Now you could think too, if going back to Rebecca Skloot's example, the image up here, she has 3 different storylines that she was covering in her book. If you want to kind of play around with that as well and think, oh, okay, well, I have 3 examples or 2 examples from my experience that I want to talk about that can contribute to this value, maybe you begin with one of those experiences and you don't explain the whole thing, but maybe you explain a portion of it, and then you move into a discussion of the value, and then maybe you introduce a second experience, and then you tie those experiences together and then talk about how they contributed to that value. That could be a possibility. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this activity. So play around with that. That's what they're thinking about. It doesn't need to be a straightforward, linear essay where it goes in chronological order. Okay, I'm encouraging you to play around with structure a little bit to see what would be the most effective way of getting your ideas across. Does the path of your project take interesting turns? Is there a step that takes your thoughts in a new direction? Are there turns that might pivot on a qualifying word or phrase, such as but, however, or on the other hand? Now, they're borrowing language from a chapter or an essay in Habits of the Creative Mind that we haven't read yet. We're going to read it a little later in the semester. But essentially what they're talking about is making our writing more interesting and complex by using words like but, however, and phrases like on the other hand, where we're exploring different alternatives to ideas. We're not just going in that straightforward and, but we're pivoting. So it's like, but you know what? I thought it was this, but after examining it, now I think this. Or after having grown up a little bit or matured a little bit, I used to think of it this way, but now I think of my value this way. And so you're kind of showing that your thinking has grown and is actually more complex than maybe previously anticipated. Does the path turn more than once? Does it double back on itself Does it have a lowercase e structure? Does it braid 3 or more strands together? So this is going back to the Rebecca Skloot example. She organizes her book in a way where she's braiding these 3 different storylines together, right? And so you can kind of do that. I know we're not writing a book length project, but we are writing something that has multiple components, right? Where we need to explore the value, we need to provide definition of that value, or maybe there are many different definitions of the value. We need to analyze how our personal experiences have contributed to that value and its evolution. We might look back to see, like, we used to think of this value one way, but after having grown up, now we think of the value in another way. Yeah, it's still very important to us, but we're just showing that it's evolved. So think about that a little bit. Is there a fork in the path? Is there a moment where you entertain multiple options? It could be defined this way, or it could be defined that way, right? So we have that kind of fork in the metaphorical path of our essay. Think about that a little bit. Entertain different possibilities. Are there gaps? Does the path abruptly change direction or miss a step between a given section and the one that follows? So this is where looking at your note cards will come in handy, because you could see, wait a second, I actually jump from one point to another without explaining that connection. Or maybe you reach a dead end where you're not really sure where else to take it. These are things to examine, because that could ultimately help us figure it out better, more effectively when we continue working on the drafts, right? Are there pieces or ideas that don't fit anywhere? Does it make sense to include such material as a digression that eventually heads back to the main path? Would a digression contribute to the essay's overall project? So a digression is when you kind of go on a tangent, but we often think of that as a bad thing in writing. But as long as that tangent comes back to the main path, the main point, it could help further understanding, right? So do you digress from the main path? Does that contribute to the overall meaning, or is that an issue? If it's an issue, you might think, okay, actually, maybe I need to get rid of that idea. Maybe it really doesn't fit in this essay. And that's okay. That's a part of the process. Professional writers get rid of ideas all the time, but that doesn't mean it was wasted time. It means that it helped their thinking evolve, right? All that behind the scenes work is just as, if not more important than what actually makes it on the page. Is there a dead end, a place where the path hits a brick wall or goes off a cliff? If so, can you use this dead end to rethink how you've addressed your essay's question or problem? So this is what I mean by hitting a dead end. Maybe it kind of just ends and you're like, oh, I don't know what else to do with this. I don't know where else to go with this idea. That would be something then that you would want to think about. How can you connect that idea back, or is there something in there that could be useful? Maybe you don't actually have the answer, and so that you'd want to explore that a little bit, explain that in your essay. I actually don't know what this means. That's okay. You can do that. So once you've thought about this, you've mapped it out, what you already have written, what you're planning on writing, you've thought about these different questions, and I'm going to actually encourage you to write these out, responses out in your notebooks on a sheet of paper, or you can type it up in a Google document, because writing it out can actually help you think about it more concretely. When we actually are forced to write it out on a page, that means we're forced to express it in language, which means we're forced to think about it, right? We just kind of brush through these and say, I don't know, whatever, then we're not really thinking about it in a thorough way that's going to be helpful for us. So you're going to take a picture of the structure you've created with your index cards and embed that picture in a document. So this is actually going to be what you post, and then write a report about what you've learned from looking at the organization of your project in this way. You may want to number key places in your diagram to help your reader follow your observations. So it would be a helpful idea to number your cards. Rebecca Skloot probably numbered her cards, and as I pointed out earlier, she definitely color-coded them. It's just hard to tell in this black and white photo. I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. Maybe all ideas that contribute to or all cards that contribute to one aspect of your essay might be in blue, and all the ideas that contribute to another aspect of your essay might be in red, etc. So that can kind of help you organize it. But you're definitely going to post your picture to the discussion thread with your post, and your post is going to be the report, and that will be what will expressed in at least 250 words, as it says on the prompt. Okay, and then of course you're going to respond to at least 2 colleagues. Make sure that you're asking them questions, you're pointing out some things that maybe could help them. Maybe they actually pose a question like, I'm not really sure what to do with this, and then you have an idea. You can go ahead and offer up that suggestion for your readers or for your colleagues. But you'll reply to at least 2 colleagues. You can reply to them later in the week. Don't forget though, okay? I understand that some people wait to the very last moment, and it can be hard to comment if there's not really much to comment on because they're all frantically getting their posts in at 11:55 p.m. right before the deadline, only 5 minutes before the deadline, because they procrastinated. They didn't listen to Professor Leis. They didn't listen to the plan they made for themselves at the start of the semester to get their work done effectively. Right? We don't want that. But anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to address them. Have fun, y'all. Bottom line, have fun.